the things that have happened in the last couple of years have taught me to trust myself again. And that's the message that I keep getting through this business. It's to trust myself and my intuition. Hi, I'm Olivia Cummings, and on this podcast, I'd like to introduce you to the people who inspire me in my life and work as a jeweler, designer, and the founder of Cleopatra's Bling. I've been friends with Erica Gerards, entrepreneur, creative, and CEO of the cosmetics company Fluff for over 8 years now. We share a very similar business philosophy centered on sustainability and practical, beautiful designs. Erica's company is famous for the innovative, refillable cloud compact silver makeup case, which I'm sure you've all seen on Instagram. For the first episode of the new season, I wanted to focus on my journey, becoming the CEO of a beauty, history, and design-driven brand, being an expectant first-time mother, and navigating life's ups and downs. Erica joins me for a more personal discussion about our shared paths. Her insights and thoughtful questions led to deep discussions and some revelations. We'll also answer questions from you, our listeners, in the episode. Cleopatra's Bling acknowledges the Wurundjeri people as the traditional custodians of the country where we work and their continuing connections to land, waters, and culture. We pay our respects to their elders and all Kulin Nations people, past, present, and future.
If we go totally back, I want to know about like your first memory or experience of jewelry. Like, is there anything, a significant memory that you have or a personal piece of jewelry from your childhood?
So I have this really incredible charm bracelet in 9-carat gold. It almost looks like rosy gold.
Yeah.
Which was quite in vogue at the time. And my grandmother found it in a laneway, and it's solid gold, and it's got like quite big links, the chain, and then it's got sort of Australiana charm on it. So like a big koala,
Cute.
A kangaroo, a dolphin.
And when did she give it to you?
Probably when I was like definitely under the age of 10.
Okay.
And it was so big that I had to like, link it onto like half of the length. So that was like, I think that would be like a significant gift that kind of made me like think about jewellery and adornment. But then just having my parents always wear nice jewellery. Mum always had really lovely beads because she worked in fashion. And I think that also gave me my love of beads, because I think beads in Australia often seem a bit tacky. But for me, they were always quite an elevated piece. So that's why I've always tried to work with beads as well.
And was that sort of, I guess, interest in jewelry, like did it very quickly turn into a career? Or I'm interested in like what the first piece of jewelry was that you made.
It's a silver ring that I carved, and then I was given a piece of lapis lazuli in Istanbul that I carved the wax around. I still have the ring. And yeah, it's just like, it's a bezel set. So the lapis is in the metal, that means. And yeah, it's just like a simple sort of signet style ring. Yes, that was the first piece I officially made.
I actually remember I have some of your original pieces, or
like earlier,
maybe original, but this is 2014, 15 maybe, when we met and you gave me a few, and I still have them. And they feel like relics compared to what you're making now, but it's also really interesting to reflect on the journey.
Yeah.
But you didn't always imagine that you would be a jeweler, right? Can you give a quick summary of your career or how you came to be?
So basically, I was living in Paris doing my master's, sort of doing what I thought I should be doing. So my master's, and then I would go into my career and I would live happily ever after. And then as life would have it, that didn't pan out. So I went to Istanbul for 2 weeks and I just fell in love. I felt an instant connection with the place, and also just an energy that I hadn't felt in a while, which inspired me to go back and forth between Paris and Istanbul for the next year. And I was sourcing vintage, or antique, I should say, jewellery in Istanbul and then selling it in Paris. And I started to do better doing that than I was earning a salary in Paris.
Just to friends, like as a hobby or an interest? Or
sort of, yeah. It sort of was just like started as like, I had this like little website blog thing. I can't even remember what it was called, to be honest, but And then people were following that, and then they would just buy via that platform, like very old internet days.
Pre-Shopify.
Pre-Shopify. And then, so that's sort of how it started. And then I guess then wanting to leave that sort of life I'd set up for myself in Paris and go and just sort of go a little bit rogue and just leave everything. I didn't have a lot of money, obviously. I was very early 20s and I'd sort of just finished my studies. So then I just learnt with artisans in the bazaar, but it was all like none of it was planned. And I didn't at the time think either this is going to be a business. I just was like, I want to learn how to make jewellery and I needed to survive. So some pieces I would sell. I was also teaching English in Istanbul, and learning Turkish at the same time. So I was very busy. But then I think just like following that, it gave me some kind of drive to learn more, which then led to the brand starting.
And so at what point did the creation of Cleopatra's Bling as a brand and business happen? Were you working another job alongside when you were first selling some of these pieces?
I was just teaching English privately. Yeah. So I was doing that. It was a very hand-to-mouth situation.
Yeah.
I didn't have savings. So I was just, I guess, living day to day. And then I think someone at some point said to me, like, you should, open a website, start a website, and you'll have to call this project of yours something. I actually don't remember who told me that. And at the time, I just thought, well, Cleopatra's Bling, it's a bit of like it's tongue in cheek. Like I didn't ever think this is going to be your career. And then Cleopatra, I mean, being a symbol of the East, but also a strong woman. And then bling being a symbol of the West, like a phrase coined in the West. Istanbul is considered the bridge between the East and the West. So I sort of just made that link between learning jewellery in Istanbul and that sort of tongue-in-cheek name.
Yeah.
But then I get a lot of feedback I got at the time, and I still do, that it's an unforgettable name. And then it just sort of stuck because by the time, the brand was growing, it's like then it's sort of not right to change the name because people associate that with the nostalgia of the beginnings.
Totally.
I was living hand to mouth and it was very like day by day. Like I was just in the Grand Bazaar working with the artisans, shipping out orders as I made them. So I was doing everything myself. And then we had someone come into the team who helped me sort of do the back end and the organising, and she's still with us today. So she's our longest standing employee. And together we sort of started to structure things, including creating a little website, which seems like so long ago now, and I don't even remember what it looked like.
How early on did she come in?
3-4 years, but that's that's what my memory is telling me, but it could have been earlier. And it was sort of because it got to the point where I needed to develop a more reliable production team in Istanbul, and it was just very hard to do everything, including customer service, shipping myself. Like at the beginning it was completely manageable. And then, and also just it's great to introduce new brains. You get a lot more power and a lot more ideas, and so it was nice also to have somebody else with a different perspective come on, because when you're in the production and the making side of it, especially in Istanbul, it's all consuming. It's very like, it's not like Melbourne where you can kind of compartmentalize your day. In Istanbul, you're very much in Istanbul and it feels like nothing exists outside of that. So it's very important to have sort of a point of reference. So it was great to have her start.
And when you had a team come in, or now you have several more people working with you, I'd love to know how your jewellery making style has changed over time when you reflect on those sort of first pieces that were silvered to now the really extensive range that you have.
Yeah, I guess the style in certain elements has remained the same in that it's like naive, it's hand carved, nothing is computer generated. So I guess the essence of the designs is still the same in the playfulness and the honesty and integrity to artisanal techniques, but I would say that obviously it's refined more as I've like developed my style and my interests, and also I suppose my own style has changed as well, so my designs in some way would reflect that without me being necessarily cognizant of that.
Did your technique just evolve naturally,
Yeah.
or is it something that you had to put time in or spend time with more artisans or teachers?
I mean, I feel like I'm always learning, so I never assume that I know everything, and that's also what I like about it, because it never feels like I'm at a stage where I've learned everything and I'm saturated. Like I think in such an ancient craft like jewellery making, you can never really know everything, which I like, because if I go to an ancient museum, there'll be a technique described that I've never heard of that I can then look into, and it can inspire an idea, or like all my reference books that, you know, from ancient jewellery to like more modern day Art Deco designs. There's lots of reference techniques that inspire me to look into. But I think the beautiful thing about jewellery is that there's such a crossroad, like a crossover of, you know, civilizations that have sort of exchanged techniques. So Istanbul is such an amazing place to do that, because it was the hub of so many civilizations for millennia. And even today, like, it's still a melting pot of many cultures, and the Silk Roads went through there. So people would arrive with different techniques from other parts of the Middle East, Iran, and then, you know, through Rajasthan as well. Like, it's just incredible. So I think that also in itself, being in the Grand Bazaar around all these artisans, just made me feel effervescent inside. I just was very excited.
Did you always have an interest in different cultures and these traditions or rituals or artistic expressions, or do you think that's something that came after travel, or is it something that your family sort of...
My family definitely imbued me with, I guess, a cultural sensitivity through art, because my mum and dad both, my dad was a musician, a classical musician, but also loved jazz. And when we were young, we were brought up with that, you know, we didn't really listen to sort of pop music. We would listen to like the OG rock stars, as my dad would call it. And then my mother was in fashion, so she would sort of bring home and show me pieces from her youth, which would inspire me, because it was so different to like growing up when we grew up and went to school. And then just living in a house where we had lots of like interesting artifacts and pottery and a cultural curiosity. But then obviously going overseas and learning languages is the thing probably that did it the most, being over there.
Symbolism is obviously like a really intrinsic part of your designs. And so I'd love for you to talk about maybe the more significant symbols, or the ones that resonate with you the most, and why you choose them, why you choose to include them in your jewellery designs.
I think one thing I've discovered through making jewellery in Istanbul specifically is that there are encyclopedias of folklore that we don't have access to in the West, specifically in Australia, in my experience of living here. Anatolian and very Eastern Turkish folklore that sort of opened my world up to an array of symbols that I'd never really heard of before. And just sort of the Turkish culture is, in the best way possible, very superstitious. So the notion of protection and jewellery as amulets rather than a decorative piece that's simply aesthetic always drew me in. So it feels like you put something on and it's your armour.
Yeah.
Rather than it being like, everyone else is wearing that, I'm going to buy it, and it's just like a mass-produced piece. I think what I really wanted to focus on was the heritage of amulet jewellery as well, because if you look through, you know, history, people were adorned from being born through to when they were buried.
Yeah.
And ancient Egypt made jewellery for the dead. And I think that's the main thing that I saw as fascinating for me, was the way that you can use pieces and it's not just a superficial accessory. And you can imbue your own family tradition and pass it on. And that's why I try and make pieces that also, you know, are very high quality, so that people don't feel in a couple of years, once they've tarnished, or, you know, you just throw them away and buy something new. Like, I want them to be
timeless pieces. Totally. What about the influence of just all the cities that you have lived in or visited? Because on one hand, I could think that it would result in this sort of like hodgepodge of an aesthetic, or this sort of melting pot of different cultures. But you seem to have this really strong design aesthetic still, despite having so many influences. But do you see your time spent in, say, Berlin or Paris and then Istanbul, Naples, and also Australia, all playing out in your designs?
I think like the expression of a design can be quite different, but the collective memory of something always speaks to people. So even like Indigenous Australian and then ancient Anatolian in Turkish, there'll be common themes of celebrating the woman and, you know, or like celebrating nature or fertility or like abundance or protective amulets. And I think it's more like postmodernism where that stuff got sort of drowned out. So if you look at any ancient culture, including Australian, those amulets and sort of the symbolism, despite looking different, have similar roots.
Yeah. Or is it that it's all grounded in storytelling and like community or connection?
Whether or not it's oral or written or painted, I think you'll find that there's a lot of crossovers, which I think is empowering because it means we're all doing the same thing or we're trying to. And so rather than seeing that as a divisive tool, it's like, well, this is the thing that unites people, as is decorating your body in beautiful jewelry, just like tattoos. Like tattoos is not a modern thing. There were tribes in ancient civilizations where the women were head to toe in tattoos and it was symbolically important. And I think the same for jewelry.
I know that you and I both have this affinity for literature and writing or poetry, or we often reference historical texts as opposed to trying to predict like the future or a trend. And I would be interested in knowing what sort of stories you're trying to write with your jewelry or with the brand.
I think one of curiosity, because I think curiosity for me is the thing that maintains humanity. So I think jewelry that tells a story and reminds everybody that we're all sort of in this life together, as corny as that sounds. I think that's my main aim through this journey of Cleopatra's Wing, because, you know, even though we work with artisans from all different ethnic backgrounds, religions, age, you know, language, at the end of the day, they all create these really beautiful pieces that are recognised, you know, in Australia or wherever the wearer is wearing them, which to me is symbolic of something greater, which is that we're all capable of creating beauty and acknowledging beauty and living a beautiful life. So I think that would be my main thing, curiosity. Also bridging cultures, so talking about the people we work with, showing beautiful techniques from different countries we work with also, I think, creates empathy for people in different parts of the world, which in turn creates a kindness, I think, that people have, rather than just selling a product without information about how it was made or by whom or where. I think we like to talk about that because then people think, oh, wow, Istanbul, like I've never thought about going there, but now I'm interested, and maybe they'll look into the culture or the language or the language family and then find out something else interesting that they want to look into.
And so extending on like the community or the culture of Cleopatra's Bling, or even your personal community, like who would you say, what relationships have been the most influential in your work to date?
I think one thing that doesn't get taught when you start a business is how it's like the relationships that you forge through work are, well, you spend 8 hours a day most of the time, if not more when you're a founder, working with people, whether it's your internal team, external, or artisans in my case. So those relationships are quite, they take up a lot of your bandwidth, but also managing people if you're a founder is a skill that's never taught. So it's like a self-taught thing that you have to seek counsel on. So those relationships have been important because they've taught me a lot about myself, because you do learn about yourself when you lead a team. Certain friends that you can have good talks with, like yourself, a few other founder friends, I think we've been able to sort of grow our businesses in a way and like sit down and have honest chats, but also feel quite seen. And then I guess my relationship is, again, as corny as it sounds, with myself, because I've had to really trust myself. And that's like when you're it's quite an isolating experience to be a founder, because you sit at the top of an organizational structure and you have to lead people, but that doesn't mean that you don't have your own fears, trepidations, worries. And if you have, if you're having a down week, or for whatever reason you're not feeling great about yourself or your abilities, you have to like manage yourself.
Yeah, I would say that's been the hardest relationship I've had to manage in my
yourself.
sort of career, is the one with myself.
Yeah, so I think like it's easy to project onto the external, but I think at the end of the day what I've really had to do is work on myself in a myriad of ways in order to be able to successfully lead. And I'm still learning, and I will be until I die.
Yeah. And so how many years in are you now? A decade?
More. I mean, it's weird because the first few years I don't consider them like a brand, but like the journey started, like I was like 23 or 22. So I'm 35 and a half. So yeah, a while. But the first couple of years were my sort of discovery.
Yeah.
Go off the rails, leave what I thought I was doing, and then decide that wasn't for me.
And so, yeah, just over sort of a decade in, then what are you finding most fulfilling right now? Like, have you reached a place professionally, like practically and emotionally, where you can appreciate what you've achieved and what you still have to achieve? Do you feel content?
Yeah, I feel content. I mean, it's interesting because I'm pregnant, so I've got this big journey ahead of me that puts a lot of things into perspective, plus my father passing away last year. So I've had like a very big couple of years that have put working into perspective, because I think we can get quite consumed by work. I now try and see it more as a vehicle for expression, but also a tool to sharpen my own strengths rather than the thing that defines who I am. Because I think when you go through experiences like losing a parent or being pregnant, you realize there's other things. I don't know, that sounds really obvious, but when your body is changing as quickly as mine is now, and you lose a parent to an illness, you see that there is a lot of things in life that you have to consider, and your work, you just approach it in a different way, I think. So that doesn't mean that it's taken a backseat at all for me. It hasn't at all. But it's just I see that my worth isn't defined by the success of my brand. And maybe I did for a while because I had put so much into that. And I'd sort of sacrificed a lot of, things in order to stay in Istanbul and really focus on that.
Do you think this is a mental realization or more of a spiritual one? Like, is spirituality a thing for you?
Yeah, I definitely think it is, because I think sometimes I think life happens to you sometimes if there are certain things that you need to learn. And in my case, I think I had to learn to delegate a little bit more, trust myself that I'd set up something that was strong enough that I didn't need to necessarily be there 24/7 to look over it. So I think like in my case personally, the things that have happened in the last couple of years have taught me to trust myself again. And that's the message that I keep getting through this business. It's to trust myself and my intuition.
What were the times that you didn't trust yourself, or do you have moments where you feel that waning, the trust? What do you understand
it's more like
about
external factors. So when you go, like, for example, the pandemic, when you think, okay, I've never lived through a pandemic and run a business, and and when you're constantly being like inundated with messages of fear from the media or other people's fear about what's going to happen, and you have to stand strong in that. Ultimately, that was my core strength that had to be like, okay, we're going to be fine, but you don't, you can't you're just a human. So you're going to start to think about the people that you feel responsible for in paying them salaries, the artisans that still expect to be paid. So it's just like it's an over-responsible attitude probably that I have, and that probably most founders have, where they feel responsible for the people around them.
Totally.
And then sometimes you can forget yourself in that process.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense.
More than not. I think more often than not, I would say that I would think about that, element and then not think, okay, Olivia, you can trust yourself.
And so how are you balancing your personal life aspirations with your business goals, especially at this time when your life is about to change a lot?
Yeah, I'm just trying to sort of be gentle on myself because I am very hardworking and I've always been quite hard on myself in terms of my expectations of what I'm able to achieve. So just softening the expectations, understanding that physically I'm changing, but also emotionally I feel different now. I feel like I've got different priorities, more shared priorities, I should say, not different necessarily. And so as much as the brand is important to me, I also have to respect that, I'll be a mother and it'll be another form of leadership that requires a softness that isn't necessarily nurtured in a workplace environment. So as my Chinese medicine doctor would say to me, I'm very yin, which is the feminine now because I'm creating this child.
Yes.
Whereas the work mentality is very yang. So it's operations, it's leading, it's getting things done. So sometimes they feel quite conflicting. Well, all the time they feel conflicting. But it's just about maintaining that duality and not thinking that it's necessarily a bad thing to feel these conflicting emotions. That's just part of the limbo now.
And is that what excites you the most about becoming a mother, nurturing this yin energy?
Yeah, I think it was time because I think, when I was living in Istanbul, which is also a very male-dominated environment, the jewellery industry is very male. Most artisans we work with are male for whatever reason. In traditional, older cultures, jewellery is generally a male industry. So I had to really, embolden myself in Istanbul because I come from Australia. We're not really taught to be very assertive here.
No.
And then in Paris was my stepping stone. It's more assertive than Australia, but not like Turkey. And then I was in Turkey learning how to sort of stand up for myself, which is a lesson I've definitely needed. But then from that going into, founding a company, leading a business, being on top of finances and, having my designs ready in time, it's all about the mental side of things. Whereas having a baby is a lot more intuitive, more trusting your instincts.
What have you learnt from the women in your life as opposed to, I guess, the male-dominated sort of experience you had when you first started in Istanbul making jewellery?
Well, observationally, I've learnt that all women struggle with that balance of letting themselves sink into that experience and just be okay with it and not feel that it means you're unproductive or not getting things done. Because I think, in this capitalistic world where you're sort of made to feel like your day has to be filled with productivity. So I think the thought of, not knowing how long you'll need postpartum, not having a timeline, not knowing how you'll respond, all of those unknowns are quite challenging for somebody who's used to leading a team with timelines.
Yes.
And
controlling the outcome.
And people saying this will be done by this date and you sort of approving these things, whereas I'm now the one saying to myself, which is even harder because it's, again, the relationship with myself, you have to take it easy on yourself because you don't know how things will go. So I would say what I've observed in the women around me is that all women have struggled with that. It's not a me thing, which is very comforting. But also all the women I've spoken to that have either recently had babies or even my own mother have said they've loved it more than anything and that they've, the love you feel is so overwhelming that you never question it.
Yeah. What has been the most unexpected result of founding Cleopatra's Bling?
The psychological development of growing into adulthood, I think. You're not just the way that you're challenged to psychologically develop, I think. To look at things differently, to be curious about your reactions, to approach problems differently, to get coaching, to read books about certain topics, to like never assume that you know everything. So I think I can make jewelry and get it produced. Like that's not the drama. I think it's the people leading is incredibly challenging because you have to then lead yourself to become better at it, which is like a whole, like you can't even do that in a degree. Like you have to do it by learning with actual people.
Yeah.
So that would be the thing that if you told me 10 years ago, you'll have to do all this extra work outside of your job in order to be able to do your job, I wouldn't have understood what you meant.
Yeah, I totally get that. Because if I think about it, even with fluff for my own brand, the day-to-day of business I expected.
Yeah.
And I was just like, yeah, I could
the
predict
ATO is
a lot
always
of
going
it.
to email me. Or like,
Yeah.
you know, insurance will always renew every year.
Yeah.
Like those things, sure.
But you kind of don't expect that you're going to come out of it potentially with an MBA in a way. And it's not until you're actually in it, learning it, that you realize what you need to upskill on or that you have to learn from outside sources.
Yeah. You have to be a bit mad.
Definitely.
I think.
Okay, we're going to have a little break. Stay tuned because we'll have some listener questions next. So we've had a few sent in and we've tried to compile them or group them in themes. One main one was asking about the vision that you had at the start of Cleopatra's Bling. How does that size up to your vision now? And looking back, how do you reflect on that original vision?
So I don't think I had a very long-term vision at the start. I think my beginning stages were all about the craft, and I just was so enthralled by learning lost wax, which is the ancient tradition that we still do all the designing with, which is carving wax and then casting it. So I think because that was such a new thing for me, plus I was learning Turkish at the same time, I didn't really think, oh, in 10 years I'll be here. What I will say is that the excitement that I had at the beginning, I still have for jewelry. So that hasn't waned. It's just that I've had to sharpen my focus because running an actual business means you need to have vision and it's like foresight. But in terms of like the sentiment that I had at the beginning, it's the same, which is that excitement to explore, the love of making jewelry. Like I love creating samples that we then put into collections. Like it's just so exciting to me. And then discovering new techniques, working with artisans. It's like the best thing about my job. So yeah, so that in terms of, it's not exactly a vision, but I would say that's like the beginnings of my vision is that excitement, which has remained the same. But the vision itself sharpened as I started to see that my accidental project had legs.
Yeah.
And that I could take it somewhere and involve more people to create this beautiful world of jewelry.
I love that. I imagine that the jewelry landscape or industry has changed a lot since you started, and not everyone might be able to have the experience you did in terms of working with artisans, learning the craft. But if you were to give someone sort of an idea or like some practical steps that they could take if they wanted to get into jewelry design in today's age and industry, what would you say?
I would say you don't necessarily, like I never went to university to learn how to make jewelry, for starters. I think a lot of art forms, unless you want to learn, you know, the history of it and the practical side of a craft, you know, for example, if you want to go to school and learn how to paint, you often learn art history as well. In my case, I sort of was learning both in tandem through my own just exposure. So I think there's a lot to be said for, you know, learning from people that know a lot about it or just honestly researching topics yourself. So in my case, a lot of like I would suggest to start with some wax and play around with it for starters. So all you need to do is look up, you know, jewelry, wax, jewelry tools, and you'll find it all. It's very easy to find online.
And it's that simple, like your initial approach. It was though, getting in there with your hands.
Yeah, I just started to make. So I think, and I know that sounds kind of annoyingly simple, but it's like I just started to make with my hands. I like would look up things online about, you know, certain techniques, enameling or stone setting or things like that. I don't stone set myself because that's another profession that needs to be done by people who've done it for many, many years. So I would say short courses is always great because you get to also like be exposed to different techniques, and every country has their own forte. So in Istanbul, there's things that we don't do in Australia. Like enameling is done beautifully in Istanbul and India. We don't really have those capacities in Australia. So I think just being curious and looking into, do you want to do like, do you like, a perfect polished piece, or do you like a naive piece, and then just working backwards. In my case, I was just sort of being playful and just making things and casting them into metal. And I wasn't focused on perfection.
Does that curiosity extend to the more administrative elements of jewelry production, say in terms of sourcing suppliers or manufacturers? Yeah. How did you go about that?
As in, do you mean in terms of managing it?
In terms of the next step from designs, in terms of manufacturing, in building out your team?
That's when the more precision, like when you need to be quite precise because you're working with precious materials. So in my case, because we have an in-house gemologist, that complicates things because I don't just buy things online without knowing the provenance of what I'm buying, which means that I do most of the stone sourcing myself just because of my connections, but also because I really know the quality I'm after. So
how would you encourage, because your connections are obviously because of your time abroad. What about for someone starting off? How would they, where would they begin?
Honestly, you can find pretty good people just on Etsy.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the people that are selling stones or, components for jewellery have good access to the internet, and they're pretty good at selling.
Yeah.
So
again, I like this. It's almost a simple answer.
Yeah.
But it's if you can start there.
Yeah, you can find wax for crafting online. You can go to, in any city, any major city, I'd say, a casting house. You don't need to have a business. You can just start playing, getting pieces cast. And then in terms of polishing, that's a bit more complicated because it's a bit more of a setup. But you can get little handheld polishing tools as well for a basic polish. And then there's also just people you can find in jewellery districts in any city that will do polishing.
Did you do much sort of due diligence in knowing whether these suppliers or manufacturers were good or not?
At the beginning? Yeah. I mean, generally you can tell, in terms of colour of stones, you can tell if something's natural or dyed. So I've always been pretty precise, and in terms of sourcing stones in Australia, the ethical standards are pretty high anyway, especially with sapphires. It's pretty hard to find dodgy goods here. So it's more when you go into trade shows and things like that it gets overwhelming. But I wouldn't recommend a beginner to go to a trade show. I think it's nice to start small and take the pressure off. And so many YouTube tutorials.
Yeah.
That's what I watch for my sourdough making.
Yes.
So the jewellery world.
A terrible but wonderful place.
Yeah. You can find people giving full tutorials on lost wax, for example.
Another listener wants to know basically your thoughts on starting up in terms of capital. Are you pro-investment? Are you pro-bootstrapping? How do you reflect, or what advice would you give to someone trying to, I guess, financially build a creative business?
So I think it really depends if you start with a business plan and a growth strategy. That's a little bit different than what I did. There's no way anyone would have given me investment in the beginning. They just would have, I didn't even know what I was doing, which is, I didn't even consider it at the time, but I think in hindsight, it's good that it didn't happen that way because it meant that things could unfold organically. I don't necessarily have a strong opinion on investment. I think it can complicate things if you've got a creative vision that feels like it's unfolding in you, and then you've got someone putting pressure on you for financial return, that can create a bit of a conflict. However, starting a business is not cheap, especially if you need people to help you run it. So, if it's something that you need, it's something that you need. In my case, because I started it so small on my own and I was managing to get by, I couldn't even tell you how, to be honest. It's a bit of a blur, those beginning years, because I was really just in my organic, like, young 20s mode where I just would, like, pay for stuff, send out orders.
I wonder if I reflect on if age is a thing when you are in your early 20s and there's less potential pressure or obligations financially to manage.
I think so, because I think if you ask me would I do the exact same thing today, I probably would, but more safe.
Yeah.
Like what I did.
Same.
Yeah. What I did when I started Cleopatra's Bling was pretty crazy, because if I think about it in retrospect, I didn't really cushion myself at all, which creates a lot of stress for yourself. But because it was just me and I didn't have children or a partner, it was sort of exciting at the same time. And I always had this innate faith in myself. So I didn't think this is going to crash and burn and I'm going to have to leave.
Yeah.
I did feel a confidence about myself. But to go back to your question, I would say, if you have like a project that you've thought through and done a traditional business plan and you are confident with, sort of market research that it's got legs, go for it. In my case, it just would not have happened. And today I still don't have investment, probably because for a number of reasons we just don't really need it at this point. Like we're fine, but also I don't really feel like ready to bring other people into it.
Yeah.
And maybe I never will.
Listeners have asked about the mentality needed in being a business owner or a founder, and you've spoken about this sort of confidence or trust in yourself. And then I imagine resilience is another one. Or how have you maintained this sort of mental consistency? What else would you say to someone thinking about starting a business, about the mentality required?
Yeah, I mean, I think confidence like waxes and wanes. So I'm not always feeling confident. You have to, I think the mentality is one of growth, because you have to realize that you are going to be very challenged and that's okay. Sometimes you're going to want to have a tantrum. Sometimes you're going to feel on top of the world. Sometimes you're going to want to close down your business and go live on an island on your own. Like you just have such a wide myriad of emotions you experience when you run a business that I think resilience, yes, is the one thing you definitely need. And just tolerance with yourself. So if you're having a bad day, it's okay. You can just have your bad day, go to bed, and then wake up the next day. It's just, I mean, it's like a relationship, except that it's something that won't talk to you. So you've got this thing that's always there, always sort of pending issues, things to solve. Your to-do list will never get done. That's another thing. Like it's just an understanding that your day ends, but the business keeps rolling. And when you turn off your Slack notifications, they will keep coming. You'll just tend to them the next day.
Yeah.
So it's just about having good understanding that things will never stop. You don't have a 9 to 5. So yeah, it's just that really. And also having a sense of humor. So like I laugh all the time at myself and at my business, and not in a disparaging way, but I have to laugh because sometimes I'm like, this is insane. Like what I'm doing, and yeah,
I think we
laugh a lot about it. We're just
we're
like,
expected to know it all. Or I think I've put pressure on myself to know it all, and then there's days where I've reminded myself that I've, in a way, fallen into this industry, and it's absolutely crazy to think that I would know everything about a business.
I do this one thing sometimes if I'm like walking my dog at night, where I like if I'm like, okay, this thing's stressing me out. Then what I do is think about myself like 80 years old. I'm like, will I be worried about this exact thing then? The answer is pretty much always no. Then I do this thing where I zoom out. So I imagine myself walking at my local park. I zoom out of Australia I'm like, okay, can't see me. Zoom out of the world. I'm like, definitely still can't see me. And then zoom out to like beyond the Milky Way. I'm like, okay, I'm fine now.
Yeah, yeah.
It's so insignificant.
Totally.
So I think just having a sort of a level of the ability to step back from it and just say, all right, this thing's going on. Whatever it is, it can be tiny, but for some reason, some days a tiny thing will make you upset and the next day it won't. It's just, you're only human, so you're going to have your fluctuating emotions. Just the understanding that things will always change, they'll never be the same, and that you have to be okay with that is probably the number one.
Yeah.
No consistency.
Yeah, it's true. It's like when people ask about finding balance and I'm like, it's not about that. It's just about accepting the flux that it's up and down.
Yeah.
You obviously have such a distinctive style with your jewelry. And how do you answer to someone who wants to know like how they can learn from you, just as you learn from artisans? Like, would you ever have apprentices? What about people who love your style and want to know how to do something similar?
I mean, this just from a purely practical level at this point in time, I wouldn't have time to do anything outside of what I'm doing. I mean, one day it'd be cool to do retreats, maybe like creative retreats, not necessarily jewelry focused, but maybe, helping people feel confident in their creativity, because I'm a strong believer that everybody's creative, which is why I don't like the label of being a creative, because I think it's very divisive and makes people feel as though they're not creative if they're not like the creative director of Chanel or something. It's like you can be creative in very many ways in your life. The way you cook, the way you talk, there's so many ways that we are creative. I think the main thing is that we've been taught from a young age that you're either creative or you're not. And if you're creative, you're impractical and you live in a way that isn't compatible with like running a business. So there's this idea that you can't be creative and run a business, which I just completely don't agree with. I think you can be creative and run a business. I think you can also be an accountant and be creative. So I think like the main element that is missing, in my opinion, and from observing people who speak to me about what I do, is that they just don't believe that they're creative. So I think the first step is giving people confidence in their creativity in whatever form it takes. It's not really for me about the jewelry. It's about believing in yourself enough to put something out to the world, whether or not it's for your own personal project, for fun, or for your career. So if that means you love, I don't know, making really fun cakes on the weekend, or like making up weird dances in your living room, like whatever it is, like you can be creative. And I think for me, like what I did, it could have been anything.
Yes.
So it's like it manifested in the form of jewelry, but it also could have been woodwork if I'd put my mind to it.
Yeah. So you're more sort of passionate about people finding their own sense of style or their craft through just playing and seeing, that's what they can learn from you, that you were curious, I think that you explored and you
that's
played.
What I would like to pass on more. It's like emboldening people to feel confident in themselves enough to express that.
Yeah.
Whatever it is that they want to express.
Yeah.
And just creating a template for the future. So like Cleopatra's Bling right now is like we're doing our best to embolden people, whether or not it's my immediate team, artisans, people that we work with, but also the wearer. But I just like to think that it's a template that can only be made better for the future by someone in the future, not necessarily this business, but this idea and sentiment that I'm trying to put out there.
I think that's a good mission and vision. Final question was, how do you sustain deep friendships across the globe or relationships? And I do think that's nice because you're obviously extremely busy. You're about to become a mother. You have a partner and you have friends and a big team, a growing team. Well, probably more of a personal question, like how do you manage all of that?
I think as much as I'm busy, I think I'll always have time for important people. I think if I look after myself, I'm better use to people around me. So I'm always trying to prioritize my rest outside of work hours in order to be a better friend, partner, sister, boss, jewelry designer, everything. So I think just like not overloading yourself means that you're actually, as counterintuitive as it sounds, a better friend.
Yeah, no, I love that answer. It's so true. Like when I don't look after myself, I'm a terrible friend.
Exactly.
And sister and daughter.
Yeah. So I think like for me, it's just about like acknowledging, okay, I'm really tired. I've got this thing that I'm meant to be doing. Doesn't mean, I'm not saying bail on people last minute, but I'm just saying like listen to yourself. And then you won't feel overrun and overly exhausted, and then you will not forget to text your friend in Paris whose birthday it is or something. That's just an example.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, I think it's just about that, just like looking after yourself in order to look after other people.
I love that. Perfect answer. That's it from the listeners, so thank you.
Thanks, listeners. Thanks, Erica.
Of course.
So now I want to take back the reins.
Finally.
Finally. No, I've actually loved not conducting an
asking
interview. Yeah, it's been great. Thank you. Mm-hmm. But I now want to turn the question back to you about your experience. Obviously, Fluff. I'm sure many people watching will know Fluff. Your most unexpected experience in the founding of Fluff. What's been your biggest learning or...
Yeah, because this was my second beauty brand, there honestly haven't been many things that have occurred that have been unexpected. Like I knew it was going to be a shit show at times. I knew there would be some incredible moments. I knew I had confidence that we were going to build an incredible brand, an incredible community, an incredible product, all of which we have done. And then there's been huge challenges, lots of stressful times, but I knew that would happen. Obviously didn't predict the pandemic and the effect that would have on the business, or I guess maybe the unexpected, resilience that I had. And just like you mentioned, this sort of unconscious or accidental MBA that you come out with. And I often thought that I was just a creative and not a business person. Yeah. And what is showing itself to be more unexpected is actually that there are business aspects that I am good at. I'm not the best at it, that's for sure, and I need a lot of support in those aspects, but I actually am developing that confidence for me to do some more administrative or more higher level business decision making tasks. So maybe that's what's been unexpected, my confidence in that side of the business. And again, just the communication skills that I would have to develop and what I would have to work through, and maybe how closely enmeshed my personal life is with the business, and some of the things that I experienced or my relationships with my family or friends, how they also play out in business. And I've had to confront both of those and know what were appropriate and what was not.
Where do you resource yourself to like learn about the next thing that you need to learn about? Is it like book? Do you read books? Do you listen to podcasts? Do you go to a coach?
One thing I've never been shy of is asking for help, or just cold emailing people and just being like, hey, do you want to have coffee? Like, I want to learn from you. I am not afraid of the no. Or I basically think once I put it out there, sending an email to someone or sending a note on LinkedIn being like, can I pick your brain? It's just out there. I don't hold on to it. If they don't write back, I've genuinely forgotten about it.
I think that's one thing we have in common.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people struggle with that and are apprehensive about putting themselves out there. But it's just something I've done, and it's given back to me so much. And so if there's something that I don't know, I look for, or I'm curious about who does know that. And then I just reach out to them. And otherwise, I have read a lot of sort of business / psychology books. I think there's a huge crossover there, and I am interested in that. And I think there's actually a lot of big business theory that can be applied to small business. So you shouldn't just think that you should read literature on small business. It's like there's some incredible texts like Good to Great or The Hard Thing About Hard Things, two of my favorite business books, which are about listed companies. Very different situation to Fluff, not in beauty, not in fashion, not in direct-to-consumer, like service-based businesses, but they are about teams, and then they are about the founder dynamic or co-founder dynamic, and then just the personal relationship you have to have with yourself as you're going through it.
Yeah, I mean, the template of a business is pretty much they're mostly similar.
Yeah.
It's the offering or the
expression that's different.
Exactly. So I think that makes complete sense. Like at the end of the day, I still have accountants and a CFO team that talk about things that have got nothing to do with jewellery. So I think, yeah, that's a good point. And where can our listeners find Fluff?
So the best starting point would be our website, itsallfluff.com. We are on Instagram, itsall.fluff. And we have a podcast as well called Pretty Hard, and we talk about our relationship to beauty. So you have been on Pretty Hard, so definitely search Olivia's episode. But we're all about thinking about beauty more as this sort of concept or idea in relation to our identity and then the influences over time. So that's a really nice thing for me that is separate to just the products that we make each day. And then I write a Medium blog posts series basically about the business of fluff or the business of beauty in our journey. So that's just my name, Erica Gerrards at Medium.
Cool. And my final question is I just want to know about your relationship to jewellery.
Oh, good one.
I mean, I sort of know, but I think everyone else wants to know.
I love that. So I am a bracelet and a ring wearer. A bracelet primarily. When I was younger, I would wear like heaps, and I don't know what it was. Like maybe it was when I was traveling and I'd always sort of buy a little bangle and just stack them all. And then I even got a tattoo of a bracelet around my wrist as that sort of one permanent one that was there.
Your mother loved that?
Oh, my mother loves every tattoo I get. Then I only have a few rings. I still wear this ring that my dad got for me when I was 15, and people comment on it all the time. And it's just this. It's
a wraparound one.
Yeah, and it's just a spoon, like the bottom of a spoon that's been bent and shaped. And I have a mix of gold and silver, which I actually really like that combination. And I like wearing rings that are a little bit loose that I can essentially fidget with, I guess. I like when you hear the clang of rings and just I don't like the fact when it feels like they're too tight. But I've never considered myself a necklace wearer, even though I look at you wearing so many necklaces or other women or men wearing lots of necklaces.
I've never seen you wear a necklace.
No one really has. And people often gift me necklaces and I'm like, what do I do with this? And I appreciate it and love it.
Does it feel...
It just doesn't feel like me.
Right.
It's like I've never worn sunglasses, and so if I put them on, it feels like a costume. But because I've worn rings and bracelets for so long, that feels a part of me. And then earrings I had when I was young, and I like to say that I wore too many crazy looking earrings that I just had to then cleanse and not wear them for a long time.
You wear little studs, like really small
But
ones.
the studs have only just come back into my life.
Yeah, I thought so, yeah.
But when I first started wearing them, it felt like way too much. So it's been interesting. But jewelry for me is another extension or expression of myself. But I'm very interested in having pieces that I don't recognize on everyone else, which is why I love your brand too. And it's interesting because you have custom pieces, but then you have collection pieces that multiple people can have. And yet your pieces feel so unique. Like even when I see similar pieces on different people, they feel like their own. They don't feel the same. And I love that.
I mean, that's amazing. I don't know what to say. Yeah, I don't know how. I think it's maybe just that it's not, we're not targeting to a specific person, so everyone wears it in their own way.
And I feel that way about perfume, right? In that you want to wear the perfume. People want to say, I love when people are like, oh, Eri, you have a particular scent, not Eri, you smell like said perfume. And I think with your jewelry too, people would be like, I love your jewelry. It feels like you, as opposed to just straight away being like, that's Cleopatra's bling. I think you have this recognizable style, but the fact that it becomes a part of someone's outfit is really beautiful. Or their personality.
Yeah, I think I want that. I want that to be the case. I don't want it to be like my brand on somebody. I want someone to wear something that feels like them.
Yep.
This was the Cleopatra's Bling podcast with me, Olivia Cummings. Next time,
The concept of the pharaoh itself remained remarkably consistent throughout those 3,000 years. They presented themselves as being divinely born and being the intermediaries between the gods and people on earth, between the divine and the human.
Until then, stay curious.